In 1970, 3,798 Australians died on the roads. Nobody wore a seatbelt. Nobody wore a helmet. And if you'd had a few beers at the pub beforehand, the only person who might notice was the bloke at the bar who'd had more. That was Australia in the 70s. If something felt normal, it was normal, and nobody questioned it until the body count forced them to. What you're about to hear are 20 things that every Australian family did without a second thought. Habits that shaped childhoods, school days, weekends, and family life across 2 full decades, and every single one of them would land you in serious trouble today. Let's start with the one that changed everything. 1. Drink driving before random breath testing. Friday night, 1979. Your old man finishes his shift, drives to the local, has 4 or 5 schooners with the boys, and drives home. Nobody blinks. Nobody calls a cab. That's just what Friday night looked like in every suburb and country town across Australia for decades. The "she'll be right" attitude covered everything from dodgy wiring to driving home sideways. And drink driving sat right in the middle of that philosophy. Victoria introduced random breath testing in July 1976, but the early enforcement was patchy, mostly limited to Melbourne, and easy to avoid. South Australia followed in 1981 with what people called Clayton's RBT, the RBT you have when you're not having an RBT. And then New South Wales launched its program on the 17th of December 1982, and that changed everything. The NSW operation was aggressive, highly visible, and backed by a publicity blitz that made it impossible to ignore. Tasmania came next on the 6th of January 1983, and Queensland and Western Australia finally caught up in late 1988. The numbers tell the story. Australia's road toll peaked at 3,798 deaths in 1970, a rate of 30.4 per 100,000 people. By 1983, the year after NSW started RBT, that number dropped to 2,755. By 2020, just 1,095 people died on Australian roads, despite the population nearly doubling from 12.5 million to 25.7 million. That's a 71% reduction in annual deaths. In New South Wales alone, RBT produced an immediate 48% reduction in fatal accidents. Most states originally set the blood alcohol limit at 0.08. NSW lowered it to 0.05 in 1980, 2 years before RBT even started, and that single change reduced fatal crashes on Saturdays by 13%. By the early 90s, 0.05 was the national standard. Today, learner and provisional drivers face a zero limit in every state and territory. And then came the ad that burned itself into the national memory. In December 1989, with 776 deaths on Victorian roads that year, the Transport Accident Commission aired its first television commercial. Greg Harper and Stuart Byfield at Grey Advertising Melbourne created a spot called Girlfriend, depicting a young woman critically injured by her drink-driving boyfriend. The slogan they wrote ran unchanged for 14 years. "If you drink, then drive. You're a bloody idiot." That line became part of the Australian vocabulary, and the TAC campaign is still considered the most successful road safety advertising program in the world. 2. Kids riding in the back of UTS. Before the Australian road rules were introduced in 1999, there was no specific law in most states that stopped you from loading the kids into the back of a Holden ute and driving to the beach. Rule 298 of the National Road Rules now makes it illegal to ride unrestrained in a ute tray, and the fines range from $208 in the ACT to $900 and 4 demerit points in Western Australia. Queensland will cost you $238 and 3 points. But for decades before that, the open tray of a ute was a second row of seating that nobody questioned. The Holden ute and the Ford Falcon ute were more than vehicles in Australia, they were cultural icons. Weekday work trucks that became weekend family transport. If your family had more kids than seatbelts, the overflow went in the back. Going to the footy, the beach, the local tip, or a mate's farm, someone was always riding in the tray with the wind in their hair and nothing between them and the bitumen except hope and good luck. One motoring journalist recalled that in the sweet 70s and 80s, you made mixtapes from the radio, used cooking oil as suntan lotion, and rode in the tray of any ute unencumbered by sensible things like seatbelts or child restraints. 3. Smoking everywhere. In the early 1960s, 58% of Australian men and 28% of women smoked. Walk into any restaurant, office, hospital waiting room, cinema, or aeroplane cabin, and the air was blue with it. Teachers smoked in staff rooms between classes. Parents smoked in cars with the windows up while kids sat in the back, coughing. Shoppers wandered supermarket aisles with a cigarette hanging from their lips like it was a permanent attachment. The smell clung to everything, to clothes, hair, curtains, and car upholstery. And nobody called it secondhand smoke because nobody had a name for something that was just the way the air smelled. Cigarette advertising on Australian television was banned in September 1976, but the tobacco companies had already found a way around it. Paul Hogan, fresh off Channel 9's New Faces in 1971, became the face of the Winfield cigarette campaign from July 1972 until May 1980. His catchphrase, "Anyhow, have a Winfield," turned the brand into Australia's top-selling cigarette within 2 years. 1 million cigarettes sold daily within a week of launch. Winfield became the preferred brand among teenagers. In 2013, Hogan admitted young ones were taking up smoking and all going for Winfield. It was a staggering success, but I was a drug dealer. But who knew then? Tobacco companies poured $13 million a year into sports sponsorship by the early 80s, accounting for 25% of all sports sponsorship revenue in Australia. The Winfield Cup ran the NSW Rugby League from 1982 to 1995. Benson and Hedges had naming rights for Australian cricket from 1973 to 1996, including the 1992 Cricket World Cup. The indoor smoking bans came state by state through the 2000s. The ACT banned smoking in restaurants first, in December 1995. Tasmania banned smoking in pubs and clubs in January 2006, the first state to go fully smoke-free indoors. NSW and Victoria followed in July 2007. South Australia was last, in November 2007. Smoking in cars with children was banned starting in South Australia in 2007 and spreading to all states by 2010. And then Australia did something no other country had ever done. On the 1st of December 2012, every tobacco product in the country had to be sold in plain dark brown packaging. Pantone 448C, officially named the world's ugliest colour. No logos, no brand images, just standardized text in Lucida Sans font and graphic health warnings covering 75% of the front and 90% of the back. Australia was the first country in the world to require plain packaging. The High Court upheld it, and smoking rates, which had already fallen from over 40% to around 12%, dropped further still. 4. Corporal punishment in schools. Your teacher kept a leather strap in the top drawer of the desk. Every kid knew it was there. You could see the edge of it when the drawer opened, and the whole class went quiet. That strap, or the cane, was the standard disciplinary tool in Australian schools for more than a century, and if you went to school in the 70s or early 80s, you either copped it yourself or watched someone else cop it, probably both. Victoria banned corporal punishment in government schools in 1983. South Australia followed in 1991. NSW in 1995. Queensland abolished it in 1995 after a formal phase-out that began in 1992 under Minister Paul Brady. The ACT banned it in 1997, Tasmania in 1999, Western Australia in 2000, and the Northern Territory was the last jurisdiction, finally legislating against it in 2016. Queensland was also the last state where corporal punishment remained legal in non-government schools. The last known schools using it were Christian Community Ministries Limited Schools, which stopped in April 2016. The instruments varied by state and by era. The cane was a flexible rattan stick about 1 metre long, delivered to the palms or the clothed buttocks. The leather strap, sometimes called a tawse, was dominant in Victoria, between 1 and 3 inches wide and often split at one end. The ruler was used mainly on younger children and girls, wrapped across the knuckles. 6 of the best meant 6 strokes of the cane, the maximum punishment in a single session, and one survivor described the experience this way. You would hold out your right hand, your writing hand, and await the brutal sting of the leather. If you flinched and pulled your hand down, you were rewarded with a couple more whacks. In winter, your hand was so red, swollen, and useless afterward that you could not hold a pen for an hour. Corporal punishment was overwhelmingly directed at boys. In Victoria, regulations expressly forbade it being administered to girls. At all boys' high schools, boys were ordered to bend over for strokes on the buttocks in front of the entire class. A 2011 University of South Australia survey found 79% of teachers rejected reintroduction and only 9% supported it. 5. Cracker Night. Empire Day was first celebrated in Australian schools from 1905, observed on the 24th of May, Queen Victoria's birthday. Students got a half-day holiday, raised the Union Jack, and the evening became known as Cracker Night. After Empire Day was phased out, the fireworks tradition moved to the Queen's birthday weekend, and in Victoria to Guy Fawkes Night on the 5th of November. For weeks beforehand, kids saved their pocket money and bought fireworks from corner shops, newsagents, and petrol stations. Penny bungers came in packages of 40. Tuppenny bungers were larger. Sixpenny bungers were described as like small sticks of dynamite. Double happies, tom thumbs in long strings. Throwdowns, thunders, skyrockets launched from beer bottles. Catherine wheels nailed to fence posts. Roman candles and jumping jacks. Those terrifying little things that bounced randomly in every direction. Neighbourhoods built huge bonfires for weeks in advance. The whole street turned out. Kids searched for unexploded crackers the next morning. The less wholesome traditions included letterbox bombing with penny bungers, throwing crackers at cars and cyclists, and terrorising animals. Queensland banned public fireworks sales in 1972, after fireworks became the third largest cause of eye injury in the state. Victoria followed in 1974 for exploding crackers and 1982 for everything else. NSW's held its last Cracker Night on the 7th of June 1986, and current penalties for possession or use without a licence run up to $38,500 or 12 months imprisonment. The ACT was the last jurisdiction to ban them in 2009. The Northern Territory still permits fireworks on Territory Day, the 1st of July, for anyone over 18. A 10-year NSW study found 114 hospital admissions for fireworks injuries, and almost 1 in 5 involved traumatic amputation of part of the upper extremity, including 4 thumb amputations and 14 finger amputations. Cracker Night was bigger than Halloween in Australia. It ranked alongside birthdays, Easter and Christmas as one of the great events of childhood. 6. Kids left alone and free-range childhood. Walking to school alone at 5 or 6 years old was completely normal. Come home when the streetlights come on was the universal rule for summer evenings. Kids roamed freely on bikes for hours without telling their parents where they were going because nobody expected them to. Studies tracking children's independent mobility show that the radius children are permitted to roam has shrunk by roughly 90% since the 1970s. In 1969, 42% of Australian kids walked or biked to school. By 2017, only about 10% did. Queensland is now the only Australian state with a specific criminal offence and minimum age. Under Section 364A of the Criminal Code, it is a misdemeanour to leave a child under 12 for an unreasonable time without reasonable provision for supervision, carrying a maximum penalty of 3 years imprisonment. All other states rely on general child protection and neglect laws. Stranger danger campaigns intensified in the 1980s following high-profile child abductions, mostly overseas, and transformed Australian parenting despite stranger abductions being statistically extremely rare. Crime was actually higher in the 1980s than in the 2000s, but 24-hour news and eventually social media amplified the perception of danger until the free-range childhood of the 70s became unthinkable. 7. No seatbelts and kids unrestrained in cars. On the 22nd of December 1970, Victoria became the first jurisdiction in the world to mandate seatbelt wearing. Not the first in Australia, the first on the planet. Chief Secretary Sir Arthur Rylah made the announcement on the 17th of November, timed just before the Christmas traffic peak. South Australia followed in 1971. And by the 1st of January 1972, every Australian state had compulsory seatbelt wearing. Before that, children routinely stood on front seats, sat on parents' laps, lay in bassinets placed loose on the back seat, or simply slid around on bench seats like cargo with legs. The family Holden might have 5 seatbelts and 7 passengers, so someone was always unbelted, and that someone was usually a child. During the 1960s, only an estimated 5% of Australian cars were even fitted with seatbelts. Victoria's road toll dropped from 1,061 deaths in 1970 to 923 in 1971, a 13% reduction in the first year alone. NSW saw a 25% decrease. Wearing rates rose from almost nothing to 90% by 1977. National child restraint laws were harmonized between 2009 and 2010, requiring rear-facing restraints for under 6 months, forward-facing with harness for 6 months to 4 years, and booster seats for 4 to 7 years, all to the Australian and New Zealand standard 1,754, one of the most stringent in the world. 8. Women banned from public bars. On the 31st of March 1965, 2 Brisbane mothers named Merle Thornton and Rosalie Bogner walked into the Regatta Hotel on Coronation Drive, Toowong, and chained their ankles to the brass footrail of the public bar. Serving a woman in a public bar incurred a fine of £10 to £20, so the publican refused them. Sympathetic male patrons bought them beers instead. Police were called but decided not to arrest them. Aezio surveilled Thornton afterward, and she received hate mail accusing her of being a communist. Most Australian pubs had a separate ladies' lounge with its own entrance. Women were often not admitted unless accompanied by a man, were frequently not permitted to buy their own drinks, and the drinks in the ladies' lounge cost more than those in the public bar. Section 59A of the Queensland Liquor Act was repealed in 1970, 5 years after the protest. In 2014, the Regatta Hotel renamed its bar Merle's Bar. Thornton's daughter is actress Sigrid Thornton. Merle Thornton died on the 16th of August 2024, aged 93, and the Queensland Premier announced a statue would be erected near the hotel. The 6 o'clock swill was the backdrop to all of this. From 1916 until the 1960s, pubs in most Australian states were forced to close at 6 p.m. Workers finishing at 5 had 1 hour to drink as much as they could. John Brack's 1954 painting, The Bar, depicted the chaos, and it later sold for $3.17 million, a record for an Australian artwork. South Australia was the last state to abolish early closing on the 28th of September 1967, when Premier Don Dunstan raised a glass at 1 minute past 6. 9. Asbestos. Fibro homes. 1 in 3 Australian homes built before 1982 contains asbestos. 6.4 million tonnes of asbestos-containing materials remain in Australia's built environment. The country had one of the highest per capita rates of asbestos use in the world, with consumption peaking in the 1970s at around 700,000 tonnes. An estimated 4,000 Australians still die each year from asbestos-related diseases, more than 3 times the national road toll. Fibro, fibrous cement sheeting, was the standard affordable building material for the post-war housing boom. James Hardie dominated the market. Evidence at the NSW Special Commission of Inquiry suggested the company knew of asbestos dangers as early as the 1930s, but warnings didn't appear on products until the 1970s. Manufacturing ceased in 1987. James Hardie then set up a compensation fund with $293 million and relocated its headquarters to the Netherlands, saving $86 million in taxes. When the fund ran out, a massive rally of tens of thousands of unionists marched under the banner "Make James Hardie Pay." In February 2007, shareholders approved a $4 billion compensation deal over 40 years. Bernie Banton contracted asbestosis and mesothelioma while handling asbestos at a James Hardie subsidiary between 1968 and 1974. He became the public face of the fight. His words were direct. "I've said right from the beginning of this fight that until they put me in a box, I'll be out there fighting." He died on the 27th of November 2007, aged 61. Wittenoom in Western Australia was the Pilbara's largest town in the 1950s, purpose-built around a blue asbestos mine. Over 165,000 tonnes of the deadliest form of asbestos were extracted before the mine closed in December 1966. More than 2,000 former residents and workers have died from asbestos-related diseases. The town was de-gazetted in June 2007, removed from maps, and declared illegal to enter under the Wittenoom Closure Bill of March 2022. Demolition began in May 2023. In Canberra, a businessman named Dirk Jansen ran companies that blew loose-fill asbestos into the roof spaces of over 1,000 homes between 1968 and 1978. The Mr. Fluffy scandal led to a buyback scheme in 2014, with 948 properties purchased for $678.9 million and demolished. The complete national asbestos ban took effect on the 31st of December 2003. Between 1982 and 2016, 16,679 Australians were diagnosed with malignant mesothelioma, about 2 people per day. 10. Beck's and Vincent's powders. A cup of tea, a Beck's, and a good lie down. That was the advertising slogan, and it entered the Australian language so deeply that Kevin Rudd quoted it during a leadership crisis in 2011. Beck's powders were compound analgesics containing 420 milligrams of aspirin, 420 milligrams of phenacetin, and 160 milligrams of caffeine. They were produced from the 1920s in South Australia by Becker's PD Lantide and marketed primarily to women as mother's little helper. Some users took 30 to 40 doses per day. Factory managers provided them free of charge to keep women productive. Regular use exceeded 10% of the population in some demographics. Professor Priscilla Kincaid-Smith at the Royal Melbourne Hospital discovered the link between phenacetin and kidney disease in the early 1960s, when she noticed tiny destroyed fragments of kidney tissue in patients' urine. At Royal Newcastle Hospital, 407 patients with analgesic nephropathy presented over just 4 years, a third of all patients at the renal unit. Analgesic nephropathy caused terminal renal failure in 20% of Australian patients requiring dialysis, compared to 5.5% in Canada and 3.1% in Europe. Phenacetin was totally banned in 1977. Over-the-counter sales of all combination analgesics were banned in 1979. The phrase, "a cup of tea, a Beck's and a good lie down" became the title of a comedy revue at Sydney's Phillip Street Theatre in 1965, performed over 250 times, starring Ruth Cracknell and Reg Livermore. 11. Leaded petrol. Leaded petrol arrived in Australia in August 1932 and didn't leave until the 1st of January 2002, making Australia one of the last developed countries to ban it. Over those 70 years, 240,510 tonnes of lead were pumped into the Australian atmosphere through car exhausts. The brands of the era were Shell, BP, Ampol with its iconic Australian branding, and Golden Fleece with the beloved Ram logo. Leaded fuel was known as super, and the transition to unleaded began in 1985 when all new cars were required to use catalytic converters. In the early 1990s, about 45% of young Australian children had blood lead levels exceeding the level of concern. A 1996 Sydney study found 25% of children aged 1 to 5 within 10 kilometres of the CBD were classified as lead poisoned. For every 10 microgram rise in blood lead, a child loses 2 to 3 IQ points. Port Pirie, in South Australia, home to a lead smelter operating since 1889, remains the most lead-contaminated urban environment in Australia. As of 2025, 59.2% of tested children there still exceed the guideline level. 12. Backyard incinerators. Every Australian suburban backyard had one. A Besser block box or a cut-down 44-gallon drum, and every Sunday afternoon the ritual was the same. You burned everything. Food scraps, packaging, newspapers, leaves and plastics, which released dioxins, furans and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons into the air that every neighbour breathed. Purpose-built incinerators were sold commercially through department stores for about $26. Kids were fascinated by the fire and fished out melting plastic with sticks. The backyard incinerator was as common as the Hills Hoist clothesline. Sydney councils effectively banned backyard burning between 1986 and 1988 under the Clean Air Act. Melbourne followed in the mid-80s. Brisbane phased them out through the late 80s and early 90s. The old galvanised tin bin collected by beefy-armed blue singleted garbos was replaced by plastic wheelie bins collected by mechanical trucks and eventually by the modern 3-bin recycling system. 13. Hitchhiking. Sticking your thumb out on the side of the Hume Highway was a normal way for young Australians to get between cities. Backpackers, university students and teenagers all hitched rides as a matter of course. Drivers picked people up because it was the neighbourly thing to do, and parents warned their kids to be careful but rarely forbade it. And then even Malat changed everything. Between 1989 and 1992, Milat murdered 7 people aged 19 to 22, all abducted while hitchhiking along the Hume Highway between Sydney and Melbourne. The victims were British, Australian and German. Their bodies were found in Belanglo State Forest. A British hitchhiker named Paul Onions escaped when Milat pulled a revolver on the 25th of January 1990, and his testimony proved crucial. Milat was arrested on the 22nd of May 1994 by 50 police officers, convicted of all 7 murders on the 27th of July 1996 and sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without parole. He died in prison on the 27th of October 2019 without ever confessing. The case fundamentally changed Australian attitudes toward hitchhiking. Guidebooks began emphasising safer transport. Hitchhiking is now illegal in Queensland and Victoria and discouraged everywhere else. 14. Homosexuality being illegal. For most of Australia's history, being gay was a criminal offence. Victoria still had the death penalty for sodomy as late as 1949. South Australia became the first state to decriminalise homosexual conduct on the 2nd of October 1975. Victoria followed in 1981, NSW in 1984, and Tasmania was the very last, on the 1st of May 1997, passing the upper house by a single vote. The penalty in Tasmania had been up to 21 years in jail. The murder that catalysed the first change happened on the 10th of May 1972 in Adelaide. Dr. George Duncan, a University of Adelaide law lecturer who had arrived in Australia just 6 weeks earlier, was thrown into the River Torrens by men widely believed to be Vice Squad police officers. Duncan couldn't swim and had only one lung due to tuberculosis. He drowned. His body was pulled from the river by police, then returned to the water so a late-arriving TV cameraman could film the recovery. 3 officers refused to answer questions and resigned. A former officer later revealed that throwing homosexual men into the river was common practice. The first Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras was held on the 24th of June 1978. About 500 people marched down Oxford Street. Police violently arrested 53 people that night, and the Sydney Morning Herald published their names, occupations and addresses, effectively outing them. Many lost jobs, were evicted or sacked. Over the following months, 125 more people were arrested at rallies. NSW Parliament made a formal bipartisan apology on the 25th of February 2016. Same-sex marriage was legalised across Australia on the 9th of December 2017. 15. Smoking on planes. On the 1st of December 1987, Australia banned smoking on all domestic flights, making it one of the earliest countries in the world to do so. Before that, TAA, Ansett and Qantas all had designated smoking sections at the rear of the cabin, separated from non-smoking by a sign and absolutely nothing else. The smoke drifted freely through the entire pressurized tube. Flight attendants served coffee with one hand and collected cigarette butts with the other. International flights remained smoking permitted until the 1st of July 1996, when Australia became fully smoke-free in the air. 16. DDT and home pesticides. DDT usage in Australia peaked at 3.5 million kilograms per year in 1973. At one time, up to 150 commercial products containing organochlorine pesticides were registered for domestic use. Homes were sprayed inside and out, and kids played in gardens that had been doused with chemicals now banned worldwide. DDT was completely deregistered in 1987. Chlordane, used under houses for termite control, had a half-life of up to 30 years in soil and remained detectable in indoor air 15 to 32 years after application. Mortine, the iconic Australian brand with Louis the Fly, used natural pyrethrum rather than DDT, but many competing products contained the harder chemicals. 17. No bike helmets. On the 1st of July 1990, Victoria became the first jurisdiction in the world to mandate bicycle helmet wearing. NSW and Tasmania followed in January 1991. By 1992, every Australian state had helmet laws. Before the law, only 5% of primary school children and 27% of adults wore helmets in Melbourne. Among teenagers, the figure was 2%. After the law took effect, helmet wearing jumped from 31% to 75% in a single year. Insurance claims from cyclists killed or hospitalised with head injuries decreased by 48% in the first year and 70% in the second. Victorian cyclist deaths dropped from 34 in 1989 to 10 by 2015. The trade-off was a 36% decrease in cycling among children aged 5 to 17 in the first year, and a 43% drop among teenagers. A Senate inquiry in 2015 received many submissions arguing the law discouraged cycling, but no jurisdiction has repealed it. 18. Children buying cigarettes. Cigarette vending machines stood in pubs, clubs, RSLs, and milk bars across Australia through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. 29% of smokers aged 12 obtained cigarettes from vending machines. Before stricter enforcement, children routinely walked to the corner shop to buy a packet for mum or dad, and shopkeepers rarely asked questions. 21% of males and 12% of females admitted to purchasing single cigarettes. A 1996 compliance survey in the Northern Territory found 22% of tobacco retailers willing to sell to 15-year-olds. For much of the 20th century, the minimum age was either non-existent or set at 16. Victoria raised it to 18 in 1987. Queensland didn't raise it from 16 to 18 until 1998. Western Australia held out until 2006. Today, penalties in South Australia run up to $10,000 for individuals and $30,000 for businesses. 19. Public drinking. Australian alcohol consumption peaked in 1974 and 1975 at 13.09 litres of pure alcohol per capita. The slab at the beach, a 24-pack of beer sitting open beside the esky, was as Australian as the beach itself. Parks, footy grounds, cricket matches, and backyard barbecues all ran on openly consumed alcohol with no restrictions and no questions. The concept of alcohol-free zones first appeared in NSW in the late 1980s. The local government Street Drinking Amendment Act of 1990 gave councils the power to declare zones where public drinking was banned. By 2016, Sydney had over 60 alcohol-free zones. Western Australia made it illegal to drink in any public area without a council permit. Victoria decriminalised public drunkenness as recently as November 2023. Thomas Angove, a South Australian winemaker, invented box wine in 1965, which added another layer to Australia's long and complicated relationship with accessible alcohol. 20. Unsupervised swimming and no pool fencing. Australia has the highest rate of pool ownership per capita in the world, with an estimated 1.2 to 1.6 million domestic swimming pools nationwide. When pre-formed fiberglass pools became widely available, the under-5 drowning rate jumped 50% between 1970 and 1973. Drowning was a leading cause of death for children under 5, and private swimming pools were the primary location. South Australia passed the first pool fencing laws in 1972, requiring minimum 1.1 metre fences with self-closing, self-latching gates. NSW followed with the Swimming Pools Act of 1990. Queensland's comprehensive reform came in 2009. Pool fencing was one of the hardest safety measures to get through because opposition came from the pool industry, homeowners worried about cost, and politicians worried about losing votes. Between 2002 and 2022, 549 children aged 0 to 4 drowned in Australia. The under-5 drowning rate has declined by 59% over that 20-year period. Laurie Lawrence, the swimming coach and former Wallaby rugby player, created the Kids Alive Do the 5 water safety program in 1988, and Prime Minister John Howard helped launch it nationally in 2000. Lawrence was appointed Officer of the Order of Australia in 2025. For decades, pools sat in Australian backyards with no barriers, no self-closing gates, and no compliance certificates. Parents dropped kids off at public pools for entire afternoons with no lifeguard in sight, and the simple understanding that you swam at your own risk. That's 20 things that shaped how an entire generation of Australians grew up. 20 habits that felt as natural as breathing, and every single one of them is now either illegal, banned, or would earn you a visit from the authorities. Australia went from a country where children rode helmetless in the back of utes, past backyard incinerators while dad drove home from the pub, to a nation that gave the world mandatory seatbelts, mandatory bike helmets, random breath testing, and plain cigarette packaging. The road toll dropped from 3,798 to 1,095. Smoking rates fell from over 40% to single digits. Child drowning rates are down by 59%. Nearly every one of these changes was met with fierce resistance. accusations of nanny state overreach, and predictions that the country would grind to a halt. None of that happened. What happened instead is that roughly 2,700 fewer families lose someone on the roads each year. That's not a statistic. That's 2,700 families. The nostalgia is real. The freedom was real. But so was the body count that forced the change. If any of this took you back, drop a comment and tell us which one you remember most. Tell us which one your family did without a second thought. And if you know someone who grew up in this era, send this to them because they lived every single one of these. Like and subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive.